Chapter 11. Sea Adventure. The doctor, Gray, and I ran back into the house. We saw Hunter lying still after a knock on the head. Joyce lay dead, shot through the head, and the Squire was half carrying the wounded captain. The pirates did not return, and we had time to take care of the wounded. Out of the 8 men who fell in the fight, only 3 still breathed. 1 pirate, Hunter, and Captain Smollett. And of these, the first 2 were nearly dead. The pirate died first, then Hunter, only a few hours later. The captain's wounds were bad but not dangerous. The doctor told him he must not walk or move his arm, and to speak only when it was necessary. After dinner, the Squire and the doctor sat by the captain's side and talked. Then, a little past noon, the doctor took his hat, his pistols, and a sword, put the map in his pocket, and walked off quickly through the trees. I guessed he was going to see Ben Gunn, and thought the doctor was lucky to be walking in the cool shadows of the wood. The house was hot and smelt of blood, and there were dead bodies lying all around. Suddenly, I wanted to get away from that place, and I had an idea. I would go and look for Ben Gunn's boat. Perhaps we would need it sometime. That was my excuse to myself, although I knew it was wrong of me to leave only 2 unwounded men to guard the stockade. It was also wrong of me to leave secretly, but that is what I did. I filled my pockets with bread, then took 2 pistols and the powder for them. When Gray and Mr. Trelawney were helping the captain, I climbed quickly out of the stockade and ran into the trees. I made my way towards the east coast. It was late in the afternoon, but still warm. Soon, cool air began to reach me, and suddenly, there was the sea. I walked along the edge, then up to a small, sand-covered hill. Ben Gunn had told me his boat was hidden near the White Rock, and I found that rock farther along the beach. The little boat was hidden in the grass, a small, rough thing, made of wood and goatskins. I knew I should go back to the stockade now, but an idea came to me, and I sat down to wait for darkness. As the last of the day disappeared, there were 2 lights in the blackness. One came from a great fire on the shore, where the pirates sat singing and drinking. The other came from the Hispaniola, out at sea. I put the small boat on my shoulders and carried it to the edge of the water. Then I put it in the sea. It was a very safe boat, but difficult to control. It turned every way except the one I wanted to go. The sea carried me out to the Hispaniola. I knew if I cut the anchor rope at the wrong moment, the Hispaniola would make a sudden move out to sea, and my boat might be knocked out of the water. So I took my knife and cut almost through the rope, then waited, listening to the sound of 2 loud voices coming from the cabin. Both men sounded drunk, and both were angry. At last the wind turned the ship towards me, and now I cut all the way through the rope. As fast as I could, I pushed my little boat along the side of the ship, desperate to get away before the ship crashed into me. Just as I gave the final push, my hand found a rope over the end of the ship. I don't know why I took hold of the rope, but I did. I pulled my boat near to the ship, then stood up to see through the cabin window. I had wondered why the two men weren't on deck, but one look through the window gave me my answer. It was Israel Hands and the man in the red cap, now locked in battle, each with a hand round the other's neck. I dropped down into the boat again, looking over my shoulder at the shore. And there, right behind me, was the pirates' fire on the beach. Then the wind, with sudden violence, turned the Hispaniola and my little boat with it, and we were both sailing fast into the open sea. There were sudden shouts and the sound of hurrying feet as the two men ran on deck. I lay down in my boat, sure that when we reached the rough, open water, that would be the end for me. I lay there for many hours, but at last I fell asleep, and in my small, helpless boat dreamed of home and the Admiral Benbow. It was daylight when I woke up. The sun was still hidden behind Spyglass Hill, which came down to the sea in dangerous cliffs on this side of the island. It was no place to row ashore, or I would be killed on the rocks. Also, the boat was so small that when I rowed, the waves came over the sides of the boat. I decided to wait until the sea took me somewhere safer, on the north side of the island. I must keep the water out of the boat, I thought, but I can row a little in the smooth places. It was very tiring work, and it kept me busy, so that I did not look up and see the Hispaniola until she was just half a mile away from me. But something strange was happening to her. First, the ship turned north, then suddenly to the west again. She's out of control, I thought. Then the ship turned again, big and dangerous, as she came closer and closer to Ben Gunn's little boat. Suddenly, I was on the top of one wave as she came thundering over the next. And there she was, almost upon me. I jumped up, pushed the boat under the water with my feet, and caught one of the ship's ropes. Then I heard the Hispaniola hit the little boat, and I was left with no way to escape. Chapter 12. Israel Hands. I lost no time and climbed up the rope onto the deck of the ship. The two men were there, Red Cap on his back, Israel Hands against the side, his face white. There was dark blood around them on the deck, and I was sure each had killed the other in their drunken fight. Then Israel Hands turned with a low cry of pain. He looked across at me and whispered one word. "Rum!" I went below to the cabin, where there were empty bottles on the floor, and tobacco smoke filled the air. I found a bottle with some rum left in it, and found some water and some bread and cheese for myself. I took the bottle back on deck, where Hans drank half the rum before taking the bottle from his mouth. "By thunder," he said, "I wanted some of that. But where have you come from?" "I've come to take control of this ship, Mr. Hans," I said. "So please remember, I'm your captain." He watched me pull down the Jolly Roger and throw it overboard. Then he said, "I expect you'll want to go ashore now. Suppose we talk about it." There was some colour back in his cheeks, but he looked very sick. "Who's going to sail the ship now? You can't do it. But if you give me food and drink, and a handkerchief to tie up my wound, I'll tell you how to sail her." "All right," I agreed. "We'll go into North Inlet and quietly put her on the beach there." In 3 minutes, I had the Hispaniola sailing easily before the wind, along the coast of Treasure Island. Then I went below and got a handkerchief and helped Hans tie up the great bleeding wound in his leg. He ate a little and drank more of the rum. Then he began to look a little better. We sailed ahead of the wind, the island moving past quickly. After my success, I was less sorry about deserting the stockade. There was only one thing that worried me. It was the way Israel Hands watched me at my work, a cold little smile on his face. We could not put the ship on the beach when we reached North Inlet, because the sea was too high. We had to wait, sitting in silence over another meal. "Captain," Hans said to me, still with that smile on his face, "my old mate, O'Brien, is dead. Can you throw him overboard?" "I'm not strong enough," I said. There was a pause. Then he said, "Well now, would you be very kind and go down to the cabin and fetch me a bottle of wine, Jim? This rum's too strong for my head." I listened to his words, but didn't believe them. He wanted me to leave the deck, that was clear. But why? "Wine?" I said. "Will you have white or red?" "I don't mind," he said, "as long as it's strong and there's plenty of it." "I'll have to search for it," I told him. I went below, then took off my shoes and went quietly up the other stairs to watch him. He was on his hands and knees, and, although his leg hurt him, he moved quickly across the deck and took a long knife from among some ropes. I could see the blood on it. Then he hid it under his coat and went back to his place. This was all I needed to know. Israel Hands could move about, and now had a weapon, and he was going to try to kill me. But I knew that he wouldn't use the knife until the ship was safely on the beach. I went back to the cabin, put my shoes on again, and picked up a bottle of wine. Then I went back up on deck. He took a long drink from the bottle of wine, saying, "Here's luck." Afterwards, we sailed into North Inlet, and I forgot to watch Hands carefully. We were nearly on the beach, and I was looking over the side of the ship. Perhaps I heard a sound, or saw his shadow moving. I don't know. But when I looked round, there he was, halfway towards me, with the knife in his right hand. He threw himself at me, and I jumped to one side, leaving him to fall on the deck. Quickly, I took a pistol from my pocket and aimed it at him. But the powder was wet, and the pistol didn't fire. He got up and came at me with surprising speed. But suddenly, the Hispaniola hit the sand and went over on one side. We were both thrown down and began to roll across the deck. But I was on my feet first and climbed up into the sails, hand over hand. When I was in a safe place, I loaded my pistols, this time with dry powder. Hands was pulling himself up among the sails now, the knife between his teeth. "One more step," I said, "and I'll kill you." "Jim," he said. He took the knife from his mouth to speak, and looked beaten. "We'll have to make peace, you and I. You're too sharp and quick for an old sailor like me." But then, with a sudden movement, his hand went back, and something went speeding through the air. I felt a sharp pain, and I was pinned to the mast by my shoulder. In the terrible pain and surprise of the moment, both my pistols went off and fell from my hands. They did not fall alone. With a cry, Hands fell into the water. He came up, the water around him red from his blood. Then he went down again, forever. I felt sick and frightened. The blood from my wound ran over my back and chest, and the knife seemed to burn like hot iron. But I was trembling so badly that it shook the knife out of my skin, and I could move again. I climbed down through the sails, then went below to tie up my wound. There was a lot of blood, but it wasn't deep. Next, I went up on deck. It was now evening, and a light wind was blowing. So I lowered the sails before climbing down a rope and into the sea. The water was only waist deep, and I walked ashore. The sun had gone now, and once on dry land, I began to walk to the stockade. Perhaps the others would blame me for deserting, I thought, but Captain Smollett would be pleased I had taken the Hispaniola, I was sure. When I reached the stockade, the house lay in dark shadow. But on the other side, a large fire had almost burned itself out. This seemed strange, as it had not been our habit to build large fires. There were no sounds, except for the wind in the trees, and I went quietly round to the eastern side, keeping in the shadows. As I came nearer to the corner of the house, I heard my friends breathing loudly as they slept, and at once felt happier again. I got to the door and looked in, but all was dark, and I could see nothing. With my arms out in front of me, I walked in. Suddenly, there was a high voice screaming in the darkness.
"Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8!"
It was Silver's parrot, Captain Flint. Immediately, men began to wake up, and I heard Silver's voice shout, "Who's there?" I turned to run, crashed violently against one person, then ran straight into the arms of another.